All right, Mr. Mayor, we are live and ready.
All right, sounds good. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's a meeting of the Seldovia City Council, Wednesday, May 14th, 2025. Time is 6:07 p.m. This is a work session, and we have one topic tonight, and that is ordinance 25-09. I'll just read it. It was an ordinance of the City Council of the Cities of Seldovia, amending Chapter 18.20 definitions, Chapter 18.52 Commercial Business District, Chapter 18.24 Zoning Districts, and repealing and reenacting Chapter 18.70 Land Use Table. So this was on our regular agenda here a while back to be introduced, and we had pulled it off. We had a couple questions, and just thought it'd be a little more appropriate to have a work session and kind of talk through it with planning, and then just make sure that everybody's comfortable with the final product here before we get it rolling. So with that, let's see. Heidi, let's see. I guess Liz, are you going to take it away then with the presentation, or however you guys want to do this here?
So I think Commission Chair Sweet is here and she's going to run through this presentation real quick and just give an overview of the process that's gone through up until this point. So would you like me to pull that up on the screen?
That would be great. Thank you. And while Liz is doing that, I just wanted to set the context, and that this workshop is being provided to you to inform you of the proposed consensus changes, and to allow time for discussion to assist you in your future decision making. And if needed, we can do an additional workshop that can be scheduled. As was mentioned offline, we are this has ended up being a 2-year process. We started this in 2023. The genesis of it was that there were some changes being proposed to the commercial business district code. And then some of the business owners had some concerns. And so one of our commissioners, Commissioner Roger Forsberg, thought that it would be a good idea to formally include the business owners in the review process. So that's how the subcommittee on the commercial business district review came into being. And so the subcommittee had representatives from the business community, community members, and city government. And then following the subcommittee, the planning commission took the recommendations and had discussions about that, and then worked on drafting the changes to the code. So one, I wanted to make sure that you knew that this was a very deliberative process. It involved the community. And so it's been a substantive amount of work to get to where we are today. As far as what the mayor just read, the scope of work on this, and so you will see again the sections of the code that were identified for changes. Just a point of information, we will need to add to the ordinance on Title 1824 and the zoning map itself, should you all concur with moving forward with the changes. And that'll but those are just title changes that will need to be done, so that'll be taken care of administratively in the appropriate time. And then, so we had those changes, the particular zoning codes, focusing on, the discussion was focusing on making sure the changes were user-friendly, business-friendly. We, as conversations took place, we know in the current business climate and before, the challenges of having a business were of front of mind to the people who were working on this to make sure that the changes that are made were supportive of businesses. Let's see. And then obviously the changes then needed to be translated into the code. So that's kind of the overall scope of work. The other item up there is just looking at identifying additional economic development that could be complementary to the current business district and aligning with the comprehensive plan, and identify community development resources that could assist. So one of the things, a lot of things kind of came into the conversation. One of the things that we understood was that there was a need for strategic integration of the guiding documents that we have in the city. And so, for example, the comprehensive plan feeds into the ordinances. The capital improvement plan is also connected to that. So there are various guiding documents. And so during this period of time, there has been work done on integrating the connections between the guiding documents. So there are, for example, identification of relationships between the comprehensive plan and the capital improvement plan. Another thing that has come up in this legislative session is that there's SB 50, which is a bill that relates to the comprehensive planning statute, and they are identifying a housing plan as something that can be included in the comprehensive plan. And housing, particularly workforce housing, has been brought up during the conversations that we've had about the ordinances and just supporting businesses, as that has been a challenge for businesses in terms of housing workers. Next slide, please. And then this is just to show you again the participation, that it has been, a significant part of our community that spent time working on the changes to the recommendations and changes to the suggested changes to the ordinance. Next slide. And so what we came up with were consensus recommendations. There were some non-consensus recommendations, and we had one presentation that had to do with the boardwalk, and that is part of the capital improvement plan. It's at a priority 3 just because of all the other urgent priorities that we have. So on the consensus items, there were some that were reviewed but were not acted upon. So there were some combinations that were suggested, but after reviewing those, they needed to stand on their own. There was a discussion on incentives that potentially the city could give to business owners, but at this point, with our financial situation, the city's not in a position to offer financial incentives. But the thing that the city can do and is doing is to make sure that the life support, the utilities that the city has, the city manages, that's the contribution that the city can provide to the businesses to make sure that those utilities are up and running. And the last one that wasn't acted on is were penalties. And the reason for that was we thought that it would be best to make sure the code was user-friendly and that we helped people comply with the code as opposed to being punitive. And so once whatever the agreement is on the code, once that's passed, then we will be able to help businesses, and the code and supporting documents will have hopefully support businesses in a way where it's easier to comply. There were two new code changes. One was referencing lodging, and one was referencing eaves that were added to the documents that you have. So next slide, please. Basically as I mentioned, the Planning Commission needed to translate the recommendations into the ordinance. And so there was work that was done to update the code. Things like cross-referencing, definitions were updated. Some items were retained, some were combined, some new, and the land use table was streamlined. So every effort was made to make sure that someone who's using this code could use it, and there were references that would take somebody to another section of the code that they needed to include in their in providing a business in the business district. Next slide, please. And then this is just the amount of time that the Planning Commission spent on reviewing and drafting the ordinance. And next slide, please. And so we have our workshop today, and then we'll be providing it to the city council, the final document, once there's agreement on the substance of the ordinance. So following this workshop, and if there's a secondary workshop, but just to make sure that we're all on the same sheet of music and we can provide you with an ordinance that is fit for purpose for what you want. And then I just wanted to give my appreciation to Ikula because she's been here through the subcommittee and participated in the Planning Commission. And so we've had a thread for representing the community's voice over this whole time. And so I appreciate that. And I think that also contributes to the substance of what we have before us in terms of representing the community. So with that, I will turn it over to the city manager for her part of the presentation.
All right, so I think I'm gonna jump in for Heidi for this. So I'll just run you in through the proposed changes. So if you look at your main packet on page 3 is the ordinance that goes through with the strikeouts and the additions in bold. And that
Can you go
goes,
ahead and unshare so you can go back to the main screen, or unless you want to share that, whichever one you want to do. There we go. Sorry about that.
nope, not bad. So the bolds, that original ordinance will go through to page, where are we at here? Through to page 27. think it was maybe Councilmember Kennedy, they requested kind of a clean version of what that might look like. That clean version starts on page 29. And so that would be the chapters that are being amended in a clean copy. They're passed. And then if you flip your packet to page 45, we have a memo from our city manager regarding that has a summary of changes in it. So I'll just run through these changes really quick so that the council is aware of what's in this ordinance. So again, that's on page 45 of the main packet. And so the first would be the definition title. So there was wanted to streamline all of the definitions and make them fit for purpose. So following that, these are the summary of the changes to the definition chapter. There was a definition for business from Title V was included, along with a definition of business general as a land use type, with the incorporated definitions listed below. So there's a business mobile vendor was included in the definitions under business general. Wholesale outlets was amended to business wholesale outlets. So you'll have a business category and then kind of all of these other subcategories. So they'll start with business in the definitions with the type of business next to it. The definitions for building setback and setback were combined as setback building. The titles were definitions related to repairs, services, and sales, which were automotive, heavy equipment, and marine, were reformatted to begin with repairs for consistency. So same with business, it would start with repairs and then have subcategories on it. Industrial, large scale, and small business, small scale custom definition and land use were provided for manufacturing, fabrication, assembly. Junkyard, lumberyard, and seafood processing definitions were included under the definition for industrial large scale. And the titles for definitions related to storage were reformatted to begin with storage for consistency as well. So that when you go into the definitions, you'll have business, you'll have storage, you'll have repairs, and then you'll go to their subcategories that are right after that. The definitions for incidental secondary use and secondary use were combined into one definition. And titles for definitions related to accommodation rentals were again reformatted to begin with lodging for consistency. So it would be lodging and then have the smaller categories of lodging next to it. Cabin rentals, fraternal organizations, lodge, and museum were removed from definitions and land use table. And the title and definition for gas manufacture and storage was updated to gas storage or storage gas to reflect that current change in the land use table. And the word occupied was added to the definition for occupancy to be consistent with Title 13. And previously discussed and drafted, we had a definition for a home occupation was kind of shortened and updated by removing language related to noxious activity, which already has its own separate prohibition. And so if you flip your packet to page 46, you'll have the commercial business district subsection of 1852. So the consensus of the committee was to rename the district to the Central Business District. So you'll see that in a bunch of spots throughout the ordinance to change that title, that name to Central Business. And the Central Business District purpose was updated to be consistent with existing code and use. And there was language removed from in ordinance 2103 that was related to permitted uses and incidental secondary uses was incorporated back into their sections. And language removed in that same ordinance referring to business licenses was incorporated back in so that there would be somewhere in that chapter what instituted a business and the requirements for having a business license would be within that chapter again. And in 1870 is the land use table. And so that has been a repeal and a reenactment for consistency with the changes in definition. And there's been some administrative changes too. It's been alphabetized, and we're going to remove the distinctions between industrial and commercial and that. So it's all one land use table. And business general was added to include permitted uses consistent with the list uses under that business general definition, which we can go back and look at. And lodging short-term accommodations was added and is consistent with the previous land use nightly rentals, except that is now listed as permitted in the CB or what will become the central business district. Manufacturing, fabricating, and assembly was added and is permitted across all districts with the exception of residential and the residential special multi in the airport. And then storage mini facility for the commercial business or central business district was updated to secondary. So those are the main changes that were made. And we can go back and look at any of those specific changes that council wants to come out. In the rest of the packet, you'll see on page 47 is the final report from the Central Business District Subcommittee. And if it's easier as we go through this, I can share that up on the screen as well.
I'm getting a message from the public that all they can see on Zoom is Mayor Campbell.
Oh.
Okay.
That's not good.
Right, give me a moment here. We'll put if our video goes back on. All right, hopefully that will fix that problem. All right, looks like our video is back on here.
There we go.
All right, so those are kind of the main changes. If Heidi is still on there and she wants to add anything to that conversation.
See, it looks like we lost Heidi, but we gained Ashley. That's what
All
I
right.
see.
All right, it looks like Heidi did have to jump off. So I can, if it's easier, pull up the ordinance on the screen and we can go through it. That's easier for everybody.
Yep, that works.
Okay, give me a moment to pull that up. Okay. So this is a summary of changes, and if you'd like me to go back into the main ordinance, I can do that as well.
Yeah, I don't know what the easiest way is here to kind of go through this. The quickest and easiest, honestly, might be to just start. You guys let me know, but if we start not on the clean copy, but the working copy so that you can see the changes, that's probably better to me. Than that would prompt any discussion as we kind of just scroll through the pages.
Okay, so we'll start on page 3 of the packet then. And page 3. And then equal if you want this. Okay, so we'll start with the title of the ordinance here. So that will identify the chapters that we're changing and amending. Chapters 1820, which is the definitions. Chapter 1852, which is the subchapter for the commercial business district. Chapter 1824, which would be the overall table of zoning districts. So that would be the renaming of the district. And then repealing and reenacting that land use table that's been in discussions. So I'll just skip through our whereases for time here. And so we'll start with the definitions here. And so we're adding in for land use types related to specific definitions, see 1870-40 land use table. So that it's clear that the definitions tie to the land use table and the land use table ties to the definitions. And then, so here you'll see we're removing automotive repair, sales, and service. And then the rest of these you'll see are renumbering here as we go through. So this is going to be the business definition that was added in, and I'll just read that out. And this is from Title 13 from our business license title. All activities or acts, whether personal, professional, or corporate, engaged in or caused to be engaged in with the object of financial or pecuniary gain, profit or benefit, either direct or indirect. And following or engaging in a trade, profession, or business, including but not limited to receipts from advertising services, rental of personal or real property, construction, processing, or manufacturing with the object of financial or pecuniary gain, profit or benefit, either direct or indirect. And then here you'll see the business general definition. So this is business general to tie in with the land use table. All activities or acts, whether personal, professional, or corporate, engaging in a trade, profession, or business, including but not limited to professional, personal, or consumer services. So if you've been part of these discussion, professional services was its own line, consumer services was its own line, commercial recreation was its own line. So we've kind of combined it all into this business general definition. And you'll see below here, then 14A you'll see business consumer services. So this is kind of the remodeling of the definition table. So it'll all be under business. So you'll have business and then the type of business that it is. So here would be consumer services, business, personal service. So these were all their own independent definitions, and now they're going to go under this business general. And then it looks like we have a numbering error there. So let's go back to that. So we'll have business professional office, business commercial recreation, business entertainment uses, business retail uses, business mobile vendor, and business specific office will be a separate one here.
Hey, Liz, so, okay, just to confirm, because I'm kind of keeping notes too and mark up as we go here.
Mhm.
If you don't have time. So we're missing B, correct? Or excuse me, C.
Yeah, we're missing C as a
Okay.
numbering.
Yep, no worries. So I'm just making notes and I'll give you a markup of my noted copy after the meeting.
Perfect. All right, and then you'll notice here that we'll remove the cabin rentals definition because that's going to be under lodging short-term accommodations. And then we'll go through the definitions here. You'll see just the renumbering here. And again, commercial recreation was put under business, so that's taken out in its original section. And entertainment use is the same, was put under the business section. And equipment sales, repairs, and service is removed here and will be under repairs in a different section, similar to how we did business. Fraternal organization and freight storage were removed. And for garage commercial, we kept the definition in there and then just added in C repair, sales and services, automotive, just so that garage commercial and garage residential were separated. And then we'll have, instead of gas manufacturing storage, this will just be gas storage. And there's been an updated definition in there.
Real quick, if anyone has any questions as we're going through these, just either throw your hand up or chime in if I don't see you. So we can just as soon talk about it as we're going through it. So I think the biggest discussions will probably be when we get into the table. So
Yeah. And let me know if you lose the video in the chambers again. I think there's a little bit of an internet issue.
it seems to be working fine right now.
So then we'll go down to home occupation, which was a very long definition. So remember, we kind of shortened it a little bit and removed the kind of noxious that it shall not cause any noise or odors or effluent or smoke or dust. Just to kind of shorten that because there is another section that already says that you can't do that in a residential area. Hostel was removed from the section and hotel, which is going to go under hotel motel, I believe. Incidental secondary uses was removed because it's going to be combined with just secondary uses. Oh, interesting. Hold on a moment. I think we lost our video again. All right. Looks like maybe our camera's having a tough time connecting, so.
Yeah, it's back now.
Okay. And then junkyard again was taken out, and that will be another discussion in our abatement ordinance at another point in time. But that's, I think it's moved under 52. That's right. Yeah. And then we have our new definitions for lodging. So lodge, you'll see, has been removed, and in 44, here is lodging, and we start with bed and breakfast. And we put in a definition for bed and breakfast, which was not in there already, just to distinguish that from short-term accommodation. And
Where did that come from? The definition of bed and breakfast? Is that a national thing, or I'm just curious.
my recollection is that it came from the Seward code. Do you have a different?
I was gonna say, a lot of the definitions that we came up with were workshopped of items that we pulled from different city codes.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe this one came primarily from Seward code.
Okay.
And so I'll just read it out for everybody. An owner occupied and operated single-family residential dwelling where lodging with or without a meal is provided for compensation on a short-term basis. The term does not include boarding houses and separate apartments, which are leased on a month-to-month or longer basis. See long-term residential rentals for that month-to-month basis. And then under lodging, hostel was removed and added in here. So we have lodging hostel. And then hotel and motel were combined here under lodging, hotel, motel. And we added in a building or group of buildings containing more than 5 guest rooms or individual dwelling units used for the purpose of offering short-term accommodation for overnight sleeping for a temporary period not to exceed 30 days, which again complies with the borough's long-term and short-term residential requirements. And then we have lodging long-term residential rentals, which was already in there from the cap on those in the commercial business district. So that definition was already in there. And then we have our new definition of lodging short-term accommodation, and says any type of lodging or I believe housing should be taken out of there. Lodging or dwelling unit that is rented or made available for overnight sleeping for a temporary period not to exceed that same 30 days. For short-term accommodations with 5 or more rooms or dwelling units, see hotel, motel. For owner-occupied short-term accommodations, see bed and breakfast. And for shared room dormitory, short-term accommodations, see hostel. And the reason those were put in is because those are separated out on the land use table. So we wanted to make sure for those situations that we were referencing the correct spot on the land use table.
So Liz, real quick too, I just want to make a comment here. So this is where I start getting myself, this is probably where most people start getting wrapped around the axle and just thinking through our code, how this is put together, where you've got specific definitions that, how do I describe it? They talk about, they mix, right? It's a definition, and then you've got quasi uses as part of that definition, but keeping in mind that most of the buildings within the commercial business or central business district will meet any number or all of these from time to time, right? Maybe other than the larger ones of a hotel. But yeah, so most of them can do long-term, short-term, and that's where it's important to understand the definitions. And then more importantly, when we get into the land use table, that's where it needs to be clean, and where you constantly have to refer back to the definition just to kind of keep it all straight. So I just want to throw that out there. That's just the way I look at all this when I'm trying to make sorts of it. So
yeah, and the more input, the reason to do this was to try to make this definitions and land use table easier to follow. So if we're not achieving that, please let us know.
Yep.
If I may,
Sure.
another reason why they are separated and they're not just all under one category is because you have to have, they fall under different regulations. If you're operating a motel, hotel versus if you're operating one of the other options, a short-term accommodation, or if you're operating a hostel, a bed and breakfast, they all have individual requirements. So we weren't able to lump them all under one category.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense on the definition for sure. It'll all get kind of sorted out when we get to the land use piece of this. I think that's all good stuff that you guys did so far.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, I think I just wanted to call out that so you were talking about basically there are different uses in terms of the same facility can be used for short-term and long-term, and we may want to call that out in particular. I don't know if we've stated that specifically, but maybe that would address your just how you were describing it. That may be helpful just from an overall standpoint, that we can acknowledge that fact so that there isn't any confusion that something could be both a short-term and a long-term type of place.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, Randy, because then, and that's again thinking of, everybody there that does lodging. A lot of us do at certain times of the year, it may be a combination. One or two of your units may be long term, and then one of your two, or a couple of units may be short term. So that was the biggest thing for me, is just making sure that mentally, as we kind of, just and pick any random property that falls in this district, just to kind of run through the practical exercise of, okay, let's take so-and-so's, let's look at the land use table, let's try to figure out what they're doing, just to make sure it all kind of fleshes out, you know what I mean? And we haven't done anything inadvertent. So that's the exercise. It's most important for me to make sure we're accomplishing, what we set out to do here. Obviously, the big kicker of this entire thing is the allowance of the short-term rentals, making that now a primary use. So that's obviously a big deal. So
I guess to clear up some of the confusion, it looks like there's an overlap between whether it's a hostel or a hotel or whatever. And how do you decipher how the code applies to all the different ones? I don't know if I've said that correctly or not, but that's what I'm.
Well, by definition, they are different.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to run Herring Bay Lodge as a hostel, then I would have to go to the land use table and look under that. It would mean that I could have bunk beds for rent, and each person rents a bunk instead of renting a room, or instead of
Right.
renting the entire space, and they have shared facilities. So by definition, it's a different business. I don't know if that answers that.
Yeah, and I think look at the mayor's concern is that the same building at different seasons and different parts of the year could be used for short term or
Absolutely.
long term. And
So one of the beautiful things about living in Seldovia is that we get to adjust to being in this community, and not every business will work year round. So you take your property and you make it work, and you can have multiple businesses or multiple uses out of your same building. The thing for the business district is, I think the city wants to require you to have a business. And we found on the subcommittee that that was a very difficult thing to accomplish, is requiring people to do that. But we would say you have to have a business license, you have to have your tax ID number, and go through the steps of owning a business. But your building can operate as different things. The primary use needs to fall under the business category. So you would find one of these things that's permitted in the business district as a primary use. And as long as your building fits that need, then it doesn't matter the other secondary uses or the other items that you are doing, as long as it's a permitted use on the land use table.
Yeah, that was a good way to put it, Nicola. That was really good. Nice and clean. Harmony, you got your hand up?
Yes.
Just jump
Um,
in there.
Right, sure. So we've had this discussion before with other business owners in the community. To your point, Mayor, so let's say, either Herring Bay or the mayor's business right across the street could be a good example here. Like maybe the mayor wants to rent the one or two, I don't know, the unit in the back of his property as a nightly and the top of his building as a month thing. You get people who aren't super in love with the idea of switching their business permits every, 2-3 times a year based off of the need for their space, right? So when we're putting definitions like this, instead of trying to go on a case-by-case basis, which may be, maybe the best option for us in our teeny tiny community. But maybe like offering a 6-month timetable for certain licensures, like maybe somebody wants to do like May through November or April through September or October,
Hey, Harmony, let me just interrupt. Sorry. No, I see where you're going, but luckily right now, what we don't want to do is be forced. So right now there's no there's no classification, I guess. That's the beauty of this, right? You get a business license from the city and you get a business license from the state to do business. The definitions kind of, they don't limit you to doing only that type of business for any certain period of time. It's just, that's kind of a free flow that, is a code thing that you just have to make sure internally your meeting and or the city can say, hey, you guys aren't really following the code, at this point in time. So yeah,
Perfect.
right now we have that latitude to go in and out, to do basically whatever we want as long as it falls within the code.
Okay, great. I was gonna say that seems like a lot of extra housekeeping, both for business owners and the city staff. I was like,
Yeah, we don't want any of that
imagine.
for either
Yeah.
party. Correct. All right, so I think going from here, we keep rolling through the lodging or rolling through the definitions, get through those, and then again, I think the crow, we can do a couple of exercises, but down in the land use, that's where this will really, the rubber will meet the road here.
Okay, so continuing down from the lodging short term, you'll see that lumberyard is going to be combined here. So we have manufacturing, fabricating, and assembly. And that was split into industrial large scale and then small scale to kind of separate those two out in the land use table. And so junkyard has been moved under manufacturing, as is lumberyard, seafood processing. And then you'll see 53 is the small business, small scale custom. And the production of goods here is limited in small quantities by a business with a small number of employees, limited resources, and a focus on local market. Small scale manufacturers often use manual labor and simple machinery to produce a variety of products. And Ecola might be able to go into more detail on this, but the concern was having a more industrial size use in the commercial business district, but we didn't want to exclude small scale operations of businesses within the district. So there was a decision and a consensus to split those into the industrial, which would stay in the industrial sections, and a small business, small scale that would remain a primary permitted use in the central business district. And Moving on, you'll see that marine equipment sales and service has been taken out, as well as mini storage facility. And motel, if you'll remember, was combined with the hotel motel definition. Museum that was just kind of an unnecessary one that we took out.
I think it falls under business.
Yeah, it falls under business entertainment. And occupancy or occupied definition was added for that, residing or having one's place of business in a building. And that complies with the same occupancy in Title 13. And if I'm scrolling too fast, let me know. Professional office was relocated under that business definition. And then we have repair, sales, and services, which was removed from the automotive repairs and combined. So we have repair, sales, and services automotive, and repairs, sales, and services heavy equipment or small machine. And moving on with repair, sales, service, construction, and storage for marine equipment, which remains its own category. And retail business again was removed and put under the business general definition. Seafood processing, if you remember, was put under the industrial scale and small scale definitions. And then setback, I just want to point out this one because this was an issue that is not necessarily related to the commercial business district, but has been an ongoing issue with zoning, is that we don't really have a clear way of whether or not eaves or overhangs are allowed or not allowed within setbacks. And we have builders that go different ways. And so just to set in a standard in code that has kind of just been a norm in other places is that eaves and overhangs will be allowed into the setbacks, but shall not exceed 24 inches into the setback. So this was not part of the commercial business district discussion, but it is an kind of a convenience to put it into this and make sure that that's clarified in code because we've been having some issues about that within setbacks. So I just want to point that out as its own standalone issue.
Harmony,
Harmony.
you got a question?
Yes, I know it's again not specifically part of this setback or part of this discussion, but as far as eaves, overhangs, and sheds, we have a couple of properties within the community that are really tall and big, and I do believe they're within their setback limit, but their snow load shed, there's two roofs that I can see right at the top of my head. I think there's a third one, but I can't remember where it is. When we have like the big dumps, it sheds and will spread 20 feet across the road, which is like, I don't care about the cleanup process, but it does make walking potentially unsafe for kids. You know, like I did watch a load go on, 2:00 in the afternoon. Kids walk home at 3:00 in the afternoon. I don't know what that looks like if we, as part of our building code, having people put the stays on their roofs, or I don't know what that looks like. I know it's like, I mean,
Yeah, we can look into a better solution for that.
hard to remember that when it's not winter time, but that is like that's a thing I've noticed over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and we have sent out letters about snow sheds and requiring snow berms to be on houses so that they don't shed into the row. But we'll look at it and see if there's a better approach to doing that. And we can look into putting that into this ordinance as well if you want.
I guess the reason why I took the time to jump in on this particular discussion is because a lot of the buildings that we're talking about are larger buildings. I don't think any of the current structures that exist have that issue, but if in future people are expanding or whatever, updating, remodeling, great, love it, love to see forward momentum. However, we do need to have those types of things in mind. Like I come from Valdez, and that's just part of what you do. We don't have as much snow here typically, but when we do, we have really narrow roads and we do have a lot of foot traffic. So being intentional about these types of concerns while we're building our code, I think is a reasonable thing.
Okay, thank you, Harmony.
One thing that, as we're talking about this, it could potentially be something to look at in the building permit process for any new building. So if we can just flag that to the discussion, and then that way anything kind of to the future could be dealt with that way. And then, you know, we can have a discussion about what might be appropriate for anything that's existing.
Yep, and we can add that to our upcoming building permit discussion. Well. All right, if there's no more comments or questions on that, you'll see that the secondary use was combined with the incidental secondary use, so that is struck out here. And then right below is the combined secondary use, incidental secondary use definition.
And I think we just need to point out too that, so number 91, secondary use / incidental secondary use. This will need to be on basically imprinted on your brain when you're going through the table of what the actual meaning is. It's pretty straightforward. And I mean, it clearly says at the end of it, not the main reason for the building, right? And then we kind of quickly passed over, but number 75 was the companion to this, which is the principal use or structure. Principal use or structure means the major or predominant use or structures of a lot or parcel for which the district is primarily designed. So
Yeah.
there's
And
really no gray area in either one of those definitions.
Yeah, and we did gloss over that because that is a current definition already. So
Yep.
I'll put that back on the screen
I
here.
just wanted to point that out. So those two you have to keep in mind when you're going through the land use table, because they're both referenced on all throughout that.
Correct. And let's get back to okay, so we went over the secondary use. And then we'll see the mini storage facility was transitioned into storage mini facility and storage warehouse replaces the warehouse definition. So that's all again put into storage with the subcategories after it. And then this is the vending section, and we just noted that where it says a licensed trailer pulled behind a motor vehicle to see also business mobile vendor, which is an additional definition that was put in. Warehouse and wholesale outlet were again incorporated above. And so that's the end of the definition chapter. Does anybody have any questions on that before we move into the commercial business district chapter?
I might. Under storage mini facility, it says it's containing 3 or more. Well, what if it has 2 rooms available for lease? Or 1 room, but it's just a small space. Would that just fall under a storage facility? In my mind, a storage facility is a larger.
So
What numbers? I'm looking for the number.
Sorry,
Number 96.
Oh, 96, sorry. Yeah, you had it on the screen.
could it be up to 3? I mean, if that way it would give flexibility to, because I guess the purpose of it is to not have something large.
Yeah.
So if it said up to 3, is it, is it,
If we look at the land use table itself, is storage just a secondary use or personal storage?
I think it had it as storage mini facility as a secondary.
Okay.
Could you have a large and a small again, like you did before, to kind of, I mean, yeah, if there's, yeah, a large facility is obviously going to require some space, but if you've got, and that the definition is 3 or more, But if we wanted to include something with 2 or less, then I don't see why we couldn't do that either under the definitions or in the land. I guess if you did it in the land use, then you'd have to have a companion definition.
So could mini storage be under 3?
Could you base it on square footage for the size of what qualifies?
So I think we need to look into,
Or 200?
yeah, we could do that as well. I think we need to look into
Because sometimes that's kind of vague when you say a storage building. You could have a 4x6 building that's considered a storage building, but yet it could be 10x60 and be considerably larger.
And have 3 units.
So I'd go to the square footage and says anything less than this or more than that.
That probably makes good sense, just as having a check in there.
Okay, yeah, we can go back to that and see if there was a reason for having that 3 or more specifically in that definition and the square.
I know
square footage.
For an example, why I had initially requested that as an option to be a secondary use in the business commercial district was because I had residents ask about storing items in the garage behind Herring Bay Lodge. And currently under the land use table in the current state, that was not permitted. And it would be nice to have that as an option for existing buildings if there is that as a possibility in the district for existing spaces.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's another spot in the land use table that is in the ordinance that addresses just storage as a incidental secondary use as opposed to mini storage units.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that.
Yeah, I think we need to remember that this is for a secondary use, and so it is for an actual business. So I think defining what we've got here a little bit clearer is something that, I mean, it's a little, I think we need a little bit more definition of what we're talking about.
Okay, so we'll flag that for when we get to the land use table and see.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, either way, that might need a little more noodling on that one. So that's a good catch.
Yeah, and so we also have storage warehouse, which for the rental of storage space, see storage facility. So a storage facility would be the building or structure used for renting or leasing of storage space to consumers for the purpose of storing or removing personal property. So I think it would fall under that. And the mini facility was if you wanted to have an actual facility with those separated out units in it. But we can look into the square footage or the less than 3 units.
Yeah, because sometimes you have just garbage storage, that there's, so it should be maybe a point there where it's below a certain square footage that it doesn't really qualify as a storage building or shed or anything like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So yeah, let's come back to that discussion at the land use table and see where we'll do that as one of the exercises of.
Yeah, that's perfect.
All right, so all these are renumbering. So. So that ends the definition portion of the ordinance. So we're up to the commercial business, chapter 1852. So one of the big changes was to change the name of the district, which was commercial marine or marine commercial, was changed to commercial business, to change it to central business, the central business district. I believe the rationale for that was that commercial and business, we kind of wanted to include more than just commercial, and it was kind of duplicative to make it central and kind of a downtown feel to the district.
Yeah, I think it's a little more appropriate with the central. That's probably it may have finally got there on what the district should be named. So it's had multiple iterations for sure.
We don't have to rename the CB part either.
Right.
All right, so if we look at 1852.010 is the purpose. So each zoning district has a purpose statement in it. So the subcommittee felt like this needed a little bit of wordsmithing and work and make it just a little bit more plain reading and bring it up to our other zoning districts things. So I'll just read it out for everybody. This district is designed to be a compact, convenient, and pedestrian-friendly concentrated area for business, including but not limited to shopping, entertainment, office facilities, restaurants, and tourist-oriented facilities and accommodation. District standards are designed to encourage a community center for Seldovia residents and visitors.
Now,
Looking-
I had brought up, I like that. I had brought up in the last meeting, this is where I thought we may need an acknowledgement that this is a multi-purpose district, because there are so many people that live also in that district, right? So there is definitely a large residential I don't know, not impact, but there's a large residential piece of that district. So I don't know. That's just something I wanted to think about and possibly acknowledge that under the definition of that, or under the purpose, I guess.
Okay, so putting in kind of a multi-use part to the purpose statement.
Yeah. I mean, that's for me. I'm open to listen to what everybody else has got, but I think it would be good to acknowledge that in there if we're completely changing the meaning of that now. So.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Vivian.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand what the confusion is, Jeremiah. This was a definition of what and the purpose of the central business, or whatever we're calling it now, the business district. I don't know if it really needs that definition that residential use is also part of it, unless there's some reason you think that it needs to be stated.
Well, the only reason I say that is because that's been the entire crux of this entire issue, is whether or not people are allowed to live there long term. So I was thinking it might be appropriate to acknowledge that there's definitely a mixed use within the of both business and residential within the district. That was all I was getting to.
Yeah. So reiterating that it's a multi-use area. If we could put something in there, I'd be okay with that.
Okay.
However, it's not intended to be a primarily residential district.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
We
not
have residential
that far.
districts, the community's future and current and past residents do not owe people who have multiple structures, homes, waterfront access. Like, it's not incumbent upon the community, the taxpayers, or the future citizens of this city to make waterfront business district properties primarily residential buildings. It was never misrepresented to those individuals as they purchased what they were purchasing, what zone they were purchasing in. That has always been an upfront piece of information to them. So when we're going through and considering how we're redefining the future industry possibility for this community, we do not owe anybody an easier time of waterfront property. I'm sorry. I've gone back and forth with so many people about this. That's where I stand on it. The future generations of this community also deserve the right to have some sort of industry. And if we redefine this area, whittle it down into a gentrified community, what's left? There's a lot to consider. I know it's a hard time to run a business, own a business, open a business. It's not going to get any easier in the future, and most certainly not if we zone ourselves out of that availability. So as we move forward with these definitions and consider those things, That's my stance on it. And I know it is the stance of a large portion of our community. It's a portion of the community that, as you can hear, have small children, work multiple jobs, don't have the privilege of owning a business, don't have the privilege of giving away hours and hours and hours of their time, weekly, monthly, to participate in these conversations. But they do feel the effects of those types of changes by job availability, by rentability in their own homes or what they can afford. Like, these are all things that are a heavy piece of being a younger person in small communities. So when we go forward with changing the definitions of these business districts, that is a very important piece of the conversation for the minority or the majority of people within the voting and working class of this community.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna go there, but I'll leave that one alone. I understand your point of view on that. All I was trying to do was talk, just acknowledge that there's a mixed use within the district. Simple as that. So we can noodle on that one a little bit more on the definition of that. So I think the whole intent of what the working group did, I mean, I think that was in the back of everybody's mind, because that's been one of the big drivers here, is to not have this district turn into full-time year-round residential. I'm against that as well. So, and I think most people are, because if you do that, it never comes back. Once it's gone, it's gone. So I think it is incumbent of the people that are developing the community, the council, the planning and zoning, everyone, to obviously keep that in mind. And I think that's what we've done. We've allowed business to be more flexible, keep things rolling here, allow people to make a living, and still live on their property. So I think we're headed in the right direction here. I don't see anything that's going backwards here. So if anything, I think most of this is definitely an improvement, in my opinion.
So this is Randy. I wonder, the definition is for the primary purpose. So I think that if the definition stands and the secondary uses can be, there can be a secondary residential, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've I think, if we're thinking about just the code itself, it's stating the primary purpose, which is what that purpose statement is about. And then the flexibility in terms of other uses is defined in the
Within the land use.
within the land use. And also, I think further on, there's a requirement for a certain percentage of each lot to be focused on business. So I think that it's taken care of, and it's proper that the purpose is focused on the primary use, and then anything else. And hopefully that addresses what Harmony was talking about, but it gives people flexibility. So it's hopefully addressing both things, but the primary use of the proposed central business district is to have businesses in it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Randy. I think you make a good point. I'm probably overthinking it a little bit on that. So yeah, I'm not going to fall on my sword on that one. But I don't have any objection to that.
Yeah, I'll hop back in to agree as per the presentation tonight, and as I was understanding the code, residential is definitely a secondary use, allowable secondary use. But if we're going to add residential to the definition, or allowable primary, or any language like that, becomes way too it allows for too much misunderstanding and misinterpretation. I like the language as it's being presented here. I agree that people have the right to use the property that they purchase and pay taxes on as they see fit within the realm of reason. But my previous statement stands. But as it's presented currently is great. But
If
we
I
start
may.
adding more layers, then it becomes a lot, I think.
Yeah, and just for the record, that was never my intent. So, yep.
All right, if I can just jump in real fast, without adding anything about residential, which I know was not your intent. On the second line there, district standards are designed to encourage. Right here, we could add in a multi-use community center for Seldovia residents and visitors. A large majority of the buildings in the central business district have multiple uses. They're not a singular use, and that's a great spot where we could include multi-use.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that, and that's all I was going for is multi-use. We don't even have to have any reference to residential. So it was just the multi-use piece of it, because there's, some communities aren't set up like that, and ours is. Our whole thing is, and multi-use is extremely important to us in this district. And it's not just the residential piece. I can elaborate. It's having multiple types of businesses, different types of businesses, and even at different times of the year doing different things. So, which is a good thing, which is, needs to happen to be able to make a living in this district. So yeah, I know there's going to be multiple other things when this comes back. So maybe and I don't know, Randy, do you guys, or Nicola, so after this meeting, do you guys envision looking at this one more? Or are we I think it's clean enough so far, unless there's any other big disasters here, that the administration can do any additional cleanup, and then it comes to the final version for introduction comes before council?
I think it's up to the council's will. If you feel like we want to visit it in a work session one more time, we could do that. Or it could be introduced and then at the following meeting have a hearing on it.
Gotcha.
Well,
Okay. Yeah. So far, no huge substantive changes. So I think so far I'm thinking we're fine. So, but yeah, we can keep rolling on down here.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So with that purpose statement, and I just want to point out that we went through a bunch of different variations of this purpose statement, and it was workshopped quite a bit within the subcommittee, and Ecola primarily was responsible for the initial draft of it. So in the next line here, you'll see 1852-020 permitted uses. And we added in the commercial, or in the CB district. Let's stop saying commercial business. In the CB district, permitted uses constitute the principal primary use for commercial purposes and are as permitted in the land use table. And that primary use was kind of taken out when the land use table was put in, with the intention that was self-evident in the land use table. And we decided it wasn't quite self-evident. So we wanted to make sure that it was put back in for that. And that was one of the things that was removed in 2021. And if you go down to 1852-025 incidental secondary uses, and if you'll remember the definition, incidental secondary uses are uses that occur after the primary permitted use is met as permitted in the land use table. An administrative permit or approval is required for incidental secondary uses that exceed 50% of the building use. So this went back to the 50% needs to be used for business, and how do you accomplish that, and parts of the year, and what that would be like to enforce it. And it did turn out that was in the code and had been removed, but there was still a desire to have some sort of check on business use or other secondary uses that exceeded that 50%. So it's saying here with added in that administrative permit or approval would be required for incidental secondary uses that exceed that 50% of the building use. And I don't know if we want to stop there if anybody has any questions or comments on that.
Well, not to beat a dead horse on that, but yeah, that one's fairly tough, I guess. I mean, I guess that's just a sit down with the business owner and the administration to sort out what 50% means. If it's a time thing, if it's a square footage thing, I don't really know what that means unless, I mean, maybe somebody can tell me that, but there's not an actual real definition of what that means.
So
I'm just
think-
playing devil's advocate, so.
So this is just recalling some of the conversations that we've had. I think it's specific to the physical structure, but I believe there was some acknowledgement of how buildings are actually constructed in Seldovia, and there might be some where a business is might be, it might be a little bit less, but it's just because of the way that the structure is composed. So there's at least a way to deal with anomalies so that somebody's not prevented from doing something in terms of their business, and that you can kind of deal with what reality is. But I think that the theme that was running through the conversation is that, the primary purpose, and again, it's coming back to the primary purpose needs to be a business. And just mathematically, it should be at least 50%, because you might say it could be 51%, but you're quibbling about percentages, but then the idea is that something needs to be occurring in the building that has a primary business purpose, and that's one of the things that we're trying to address. And the other that we wanted to address is that if there's some kind of odd circumstance, that it doesn't disempower the person from doing their business.
Yeah, I think, Randy, I like what you're saying. I get the intent of it. And the only thing, right, is, I mean, it's fine with all the players here that, we have the same administration, everyone looks at this. You get one, I'll just say it, you get one wingnut in there that starts going down and looking at everything verbatim per line. And then we all know in Seldovia what happens come fall, right? Come fall, after our high season of 3 to 5 months, then it's dead. It's DEAD, dead. Everything is incidental secondary use per se at that point, for 7 or 8 months out of the year. So that's my only concern with having that in there. I don't have the answer to it, but that's where it gets very tricky for so many of the businesses to figure. They're not, I mean, they're trying to do what they can do. Most of us are trying to, meet that intent. It gets tough when you get into that off season and you're trying to do what you can do to make money. So I think it's probably fine that we leave it in there now. And it's, if something comes up, I mean, that's the best thing, right? It's a small town. That's the beautiful thing here is, the manager is the code enforcement officer, if you will. And if there's an issue, the administration will bring it to either the business or the owner. And then at that point, they can get into a discussion to, make sure that the intent is being met, obviously. So.
And it looks like we do have Heidi back
Oh,
online
she's
here.
back.
I would just follow up and say with that, Mr. Mayor, and it's not, we left it open-ended for an administrative permit or approval because there are a lot of ways that we do grant approval for businesses in that district, whether that be a business license or a building permit for something new, or if it's being reconstructed. And there are ways that if that's approved going forward as a use, then they have that approval there in a different form. So I know it's tricky, and I'm, maybe we can, I know we'll keep working on it. I think it's a way to acknowledge that ultimately in the end, those properties should have that primary purpose and to encourage people to uphold that. And it's never been a time thing, but I get how somebody could misconstrue that in the future. But it's that understanding that you will operate a business and that will be the primary purpose for whatever time that is allotted. And then the other, incidental secondary uses are secondary to that business. I hope that makes sense, but that's
Yeah.
that administrative permit or approval is to try to give that flexibility of like, hey, yeah, we know and we recognize at the city office what is happening in that space. We've approved a business license, or we've approved a building permit, or we've approved administrative permit, whatever it is that's going on. That says we are aware, and that's great. Versus if you had somebody who was really trying to get away with not being so honest, it provides that little bit of backing of like, no, wait, this has not been approved.
Right, right. Yeah, and I don't think the incidental secondary uses, other than, a few folks trying to live in their buildings and not having any business or a legitimate business, right? I mean, that's literally what it comes down to in this district. Generally, everybody that buys there knows they got to do a business, and most people put forth a good faith, put good faith forward and try to do that. So and yeah, and obviously you'd probably be the first one to come to council if that started becoming any kind of a major issue. So yeah, I don't it's probably not going to be a problem. I just wanted to point it out that yeah, it's that, when that type of language, it gets a little tough to work through it. So
Well, and I believe also if we go down to the next part of the section B, that also leads into that, showing that if you're fulfilling that requirement and you have that primary purpose, I mean, it's being met. So that per
Yeah.
chapter 5.3 business license, no person may engage in a business in the city without first obtaining an annual business license. All those requirements must be met for that primary permitted person. Primary permitted use to be considered met in order to have that incidental secondary use. So if you're fulfilling that chapter 5.35, then that incidental secondary use, it can be met because you've already taken care of the primary. So that's the second piece to it.
yeah, I think that's probably helpful in the argument, exactly for that, in the argument to make sure that people are meeting the intent of the primary use.
Yeah, and I would say that's exactly the point, Mr. Mayor, what we're trying to do, what we've been trying to do. So I'm totally perfectly okay with the language we have thus far. Thanks.
Good. All right. Oh, sounds like that's all covered there.
I'd like to make a comment. We're struggling with the 50% or square footage. A lot of these are existing buildings and people are trying to make it work for business. I think what might be the right thing to do is to mandate that they have a signed designated entrance door to the building that they're doing business in. And how the rest of it falls in, I don't know, but something there that, because you can't hardly take some of these older buildings that weren't built to be in business, and maybe they were residents at one time, and you can't get a 50-50 split, or your square footage doesn't work out to be. But maybe there's got to be a designated main entry door to a business that's signed above it to identify the business that's there.
So this is Randy. I just wanted to bring up that the business doesn't necessarily have to be a public facing business. So there are businesses in buildings that aren't a retail business necessarily. They can be like a consulting business or a service business. So it may not be obvious to someone looking at the building that there's a business in there, but there's actually a business. So that, like, for somebody who has a non-retail business, having an extra door may or may not be necessary.
Well, you're still going to deal with the 50% or square footage
Yeah.
separation. And I think that's where it's hard that how do you have a building that you can identify what's 50% of it in some cases, where if you say you got to have an entry door for the bit, whether the access into the resident through it or not, but something there that states that this is a business here. You know, I don't know how you're going to separate the 50% or square footage, especially on an existing structure.
Yeah, I think the best we can do there is with that, with B and meeting the intent. So, I mean, rather than beating that one up, I think, yeah, Heidi, you want to follow up to that?
Well, I'm just looking at it and I'm wondering, if it's the 50% that's really throwing everything off, maybe it's as simple as just saying an administrative permit or approval is required for incidental secondary uses that exceed the primary permitted use of the building. I'm not sure. I'm still thinking through that. But maybe is it the number that's throwing people off?
Well,
Because
yeah,
it's so
that's exactly what it is. It's the number, because the number doesn't, it doesn't stipulate if it's a size or a duration. It just says 50%, right? So
uh-huh.
there's nothing to gauge that against. And I'm just saying, if someone wanted to really be sticky and come up with an argument against the administration, that's what they would throw out there. So I mean, if legal would look at that and go, well, what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything to me. So
Right.
that's my only point. Not
Especially
trying
if
to
it's not
muddy
a
the
front,
water.
like a traffic business, especially if it's not like a retail.
Mhm.
business. How do you qualify 50% of your building is being used for a business if it's a consulting business and you're just using one computer in one room? That's a kind of a strange, that definitely does need some more fine tuning.
I think we can workshop it. It's running through my head here, a way to, I think, make that a little bit. I mean, we want the language to be flexible and but with intent that the primary I think the goal is that we're setting up the primary purpose to be that primary purpose and with the intent that is for the most part more of the building than the incidental secondary use. Is that correct? Is that what we're trying to establish? Is that
Yeah,
primary purpose?
let me give you an example. So just real
Right.
easy, quick. 2,000 square foot building, top and bottom. Your storefront's on bottom, it's 800 square feet. Your house is on top, it's 1,200 square feet. Under this definition, have you met the primary use of 025? You may have met it under B, but under 025, you have not met it. That's the point.
So do we need this language in there if we're saying that you have to have a primary purpose first?
We need
And then
something. I think we need
Yeah.
something like everybody has agreed to. I just don't think you can have 50% in there, because it's not a real thing unless you can tie it to something.
If I may.
Addressed it everywhere else in 18.52, and B really helps out. You muddy the waters by having the 50% in there.
So the suggestion was made by Chair Sweet that if we took out the word use at the end and just said that it was required for incidental secondary uses that exceed 50% of the building instead of the building use, that would tie it to the structure. Is that the concern? Or
Well, I don't like the square footage. I'll just tell you, I don't like the square footage because,
I have another option.
yeah,
I have another option.
throw it out there.
An administrative permit or approval is required if an incidental or secondary use becomes the primary or majority use of the building.
Seems reasonable.
I like that.
I like that.
But is that saying that would be allowable? So someone could have their Secondary.
You would need a permit if
Excuse me?
your secondary becomes a majority of the building. An administrative permit or approval is required if an incidental or secondary use becomes the primary or majority use of the building.
So we're saying that with, under that definition, that it could become the primary use with a permit?
No, you would need a permit for your larger secondary use.
I think we're opening up a can of worms if we do that. I think it needs to be a little bit more concise. What we're trying to get around is an issue that's happened before. And so if it's, as Jeremiah said, if it's off 200 square feet, that consideration would be an administrative permit or approval. I mean, we're not going to get in there and measure 50% of a building, but people have tried to get around this for years, and that's why we're in the situation we're at. So I want to make it really clear that our incidental secondaries are clearly what they are, and they're not being taken as the primary, switching rules. So I think we're covered by having the administrative permit and approval.
And I think we could, yeah, I like what Acola was saying. I like where she was going with it. I think it could be covered in that an administrative permit or approval is required for incidental secondary uses that exceed the building or that exceed, I don't know, there's a way to say that, where the primary use is exceeded by the secondary use in the building and tying it back to that. We'll workshop it.
Yeah, I think we're all under the same page, and we just we don't want to cause the administration a bunch of grief. You get two neighbors that get in a pissing match, and pretty soon one of them says, "Well, you're not even in compliance because of this." You know what I mean? I mean, these are all real things that we don't want to make them a problem. So, and that's where when we've agreed to this before, you can't have language in your code that causes conflict. Otherwise you just end up in a big mess. So, but yeah, I think you guys noodle on that, and then we go from there and look at the final version, and we'll keep pounding away at this.
We could maybe have that run through legal if that's an option.
Yeah, whatever we do, we want to keep it simple.
Okay, so moving through that, we'll have 1824s here, and we'll just need to put that into the main part of it. But this is the zoning district table that it's divided into, and you'll see that commercial is replaced with central business there. And is there a consensus on council that change we're good with the central business district? I just kind of want to get an idea if that's.
Does anybody object to that?
Sounds good.
I like it. Object now or forever hold your peace.
We went through a varied number of possibilities within the subcommittee. I think there was the waterfront central business district, the downtown district. There was several options mentioned, but I think everybody was fairly happy with that one.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
can we jump back really quick to your the permit idea? I like that permit idea a lot. It seems like a reasonable compromise. When we're putting that language together, I'd like to make sure that it's understood that it's not a transferable permit. It cannot pass hand between property owners. The property cannot be sold with that permit. I don't think having I don't know what your time frame looks like, or the sunset looks like, or year to year, whatever renewal, that seems excessive. But I do want to make sure that we do have it in our language that is not a transferable agreement.
Yeah, I don't know. Randy, did you guys or Cole, did you guys ever talk anything? I don't know, maybe it didn't come up. I don't know. Did you guys ever talk about permits being transferable or anything?
We haven't. I think we should probably look at the conditions for a business license, because I don't know that it could be transferable, just because if you're having a business, you have to apply for it under your own name and conduct it, I believe, but I think that's just something we need to check to see I think if somebody sells their place and is, because they're no longer operating that business, I would assume that business it expires for the next person to take on the permit. I mean, the business license application, both for the city and the state, the new person would have to apply for it.
I think you might be on the administrative permit that people have to fill out. You can have something on there that just says not transferable.
Yeah, on the form itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the permit, and currently we have the administrative permit for the long-term residential rentals, and that is what is on there. And it does have a timeline expiring, so we could look at making that a renewable thing as well. And we can workshop and see if any of that's needed in the code to make sure that is the case. I don't know if Heidi has any other comments on that one.
If you guys just take a look at that, I think that's a good idea.
Turned my mic off. Okay. So scrolling back down here, so we'll see the change of the name of the district again. And now we get to the land use table. So the land use table, it was much clearer to do a repeal and reenact of the land use table. So within here, we left in the land use table in its strikeout so you can see what it looked like. And you'll see it has principal permitted use, conditional use, secondary use not permitted with a key. And just for those that aren't familiar, the land use, these are all the district abbreviations here. So residential general, residential special, multi, residential, waterfront, commercial residential, commercial industrial, commercial business, commercial residential, airport, and public is at the end. So this is the table as it stands now, which would be struck out. And you'll notice it has commercial land use types as headers, industrial land use types.
Okay, quick comment. One thing I noticed right out of the gate, because it was a real pain in the butt, when you struck all the headers, you really struck all the headers. So the header needs to go back, just the simple one, the land uses and all the acronyms up there, the abbreviation, that one line needs to go back at the top of each page break.
It's
Because when you're scrolling, you don't know where you're at.
Yeah, duly noted. And it is hard because in the clean copy, you'll see that is where it's at. And when it becomes incorporated and codified, that will be that. But we don't know where those headers should be within the pages quite yet. So in the ordinance, it's just at the very beginning of it.
Okay,
But when
so
it'll
be in there in the final version.
yeah, it is codified, it will go
Okay.
into the top of the page headers.
Perfect.
But that's kind of hard to do with the strikeouts and the other pieces to it. So now we'll get to the reenacted chapter here. So we've added in a B here for definitions related to a specific land use. See these specific definitions. So just telling you where in the code to find the specific definitions if you're just looking at the land use table.
Yeah. 41.
Page 41. I'll give everybody a second to get to page 41. Okay. So here again, you'll see that the zoning district's key is there and that commercial business is now changed to central business district. And all the other ones remain the same. Oh no. And the land use type key, we have principal permitted use still the same, conditional use. What's been added in, it is administrative permit required. secondary use not permitted, and on the table itself, you'll see also not applicable, which was something that was requested by certain members of the committee, just to make sure we knew that in those districts, it's not something you need to concern yourself with looking at. So the administrative permit is a new add to that. Just make sure when you look on the land use table that you'll see that the administrative permit is required. And that generally, at the moment, applies to long-term residential rentals, which are capped in the commercial business district. But going forward might apply to more things. And you'll see it added in here. So the other thing I'll point out is here, so we have the headers at the top, and when it's codified, it will be at the top of every page. But this is one of the things done was it was put in alphabetical order. And those distinctions between commercial, industrial, residential, and public were taken out. So everything is in one table. And then one of the great suggestions was to gray out every other line so that you can read the table a little bit better. And you'll see under business general, we have administrative permit required there. And that is in the public district. And that is because that's public land, so we want to make sure that we have an administrative permit from the city on city property. Go ahead.
And also before it was not permitted, and you currently have people operating business in public land.
Yes, that's correct. So going down here, we have everything in alphabetical order. We have, you'll see business general has been added on, unless listed separately in land use table. So I want to make sure that if it's not listed separately in the table, that it is permitted under these circumstances.
And then everything that's listed in the land use table is defined in the 18.20.
Yes, that is the goal.
So,
Yeah.
so that way anybody that's using the table can go back and look something up if they have a question.
Yep. So I'll go down and you'll see that we have lodging in here. So lodging, bed and breakfast. It's in here, lodging hostel, lodging hotel motel, lodging long-term residential rental was added to the table just to define it. And in there, you'll see administrative permit is in the commercial business district for that one. And lodging short-term accommodation was added as well. And then manufacturing, fabricating, and assembly, that was split into the large scale and small scale. And large scale was, I believe, conditional within the commercial business district or central business district. And manufacturing, fabricating, and assembly in a small business, small scale, would be my administrative permit on public properties. And going down here, we have offices. Business specific office was added as instead of being under business general. So we wanted to make sure that somebody's office for another business property was not their primary use. I believe it's under a secondary use in the central business district now. And then you'll see we have repair services and sales, automotive and heavy equipment or machinery have their own lines in here, as well as marine equipment has its own because we wanted to preserve that being part of the central business district. And restaurant remains the same, schools. And storage and staging for freight or transportation remains the same, but it's organized and alphabetized. And we'll get down to, we have storage facility, storage mini facility, storage warehouse, and storage yard. So those are the definitions that maybe come back to Ecola's question from earlier on that. Then that is the end of the ordinance as written. And then on this next page here, 29, is a clean copy version of what that would look like once it was codified in terms. So without the strikeouts. So I'll go back up to the beginning of the land use table here and just see if there's any initial comments on this, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, I don't have anything on the first part there until we get down into the table.
All right, so if we go, would you like to just go through the table, or what would be the best way for you to do this?
I don't know what I mean, we don't have to go through every single thing. I think we just need to, here's a couple things right out of the gate, and I brought this up last time, and I don't think it's correct. Go to the dwelling units.
Which page are you on?
This is page 25.
Yeah, right there. So you've got 4 types of dwelling units. So in my opinion, dwelling units they're not a use, they're a definition. And here's what I want to get to. Here's the first exercise. The third one, dwelling units, structure containing 4 or less units in the central business district, not permitted. So can somebody tell me what that means?
Sure, Mr. Mayor. I've been thinking about this a lot, especially since last time you brought it up. So these dwelling units are referring to the use as a residential use, and maybe we can clarify that better in the language. What that is saying is if you have a building with 4 residential apartments or 4 dwelling units in it, and you're using that as a residence home, that's not permitted. So if you have a 4-plex and you live there and your sister lives there and her nephew lives there and I don't know, whoever, and you guys are using it as a home in that district with no business, right? It's a residence, strictly residence, 4 units, that's not permitted.
Okay, then we got to clean that up because that's not what that says, right? I mean, I get what you're saying, but that's not what that says. So I look at that, dwelling units means it's got to have a kitchen, just on its face, running through the land use table, because that's how we do this, right? We look at the left, we go down to the grid, we look up, we find our unit, and we see if it's yes or no, or permitted, or secondary, or primary. So let's take Dawn's place. Let's take Ecola's place. Let's just pick any place that's a multi-unit. I've only got 1 apartment in the hotel. So I've got 1. Well, I would qualify 2, right? Dwelling units, structures containing 4 or less units not permitted in this district. That's why I'm saying I don't think that is correct. If there's a workaround that you're seeing like on 4-plexes and stuff, somehow we got to address that somewhere else. This is not clear. This is very, very confusing to me. And I want to make sure that we don't have anything that conflicts with other parts of the code or the languages. And then here you go, dwelling unit structures containing 5 or more units. So if I want to put a kitchen in 5 of my units, I know I'm already meeting the use as a hotel, but under this says structures containing 5 or more units, not permitted. So it's in direct conflict with my primary use. That's what I'm saying. These are definitions. These are not uses. So somehow if we have other uses that we want to make sure aren't falling through the crack, we gotta do something different and title them or label them differently. Now, I haven't considered any other district here, but I'm sure it's going to be the same. It wouldn't matter. It's going to be the same thing. I don't think it's applicable, but I haven't run through the exercise of all the other zoning districts.
So, Mr. Mayor, could it be as simple as saying something like dwelling units, residential use? I don't know. We could look at that. I think there's a way to tie that in. Dwelling units, a language that's been used throughout the code for a long time. It doesn't mean we can't change it out. But I think there's a way that maybe we could transition, and without doing a full workover initially, but in making that more clear in the land use table that when we're talking about dwelling units, we're talking about residential uses.
Okay, and I just want to make sure the residential meaning in this case, it's a secondary use. It gets a little confusing. I don't care how it ends up. I just don't want it to be confusing. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I've stated this before, we have every different type of structure imaginable in Seldovia, and most of them have been either hodgepodge or added on or remodeled or whatever to serve a purpose, right? I don't want anybody telling me or anybody else that they can't have, 2 kitchens, 3 kitchens, or 12 kitchens in their building to conduct their business. That's my only point. So I just don't want dwelling units, the type of units we have in our facilities, to dictate or restrict us on doing business.
So,
I
Mr. Mayor.
get there. So, yep.
Yeah, and I hear you, and I think we can work through it. I do think that this has been a long-standing issue, and part of that is, especially when we hear from people, well, this building was built as a residential use. It's always been a residential use, and I think maybe that's why this was in the code, was to try to address that. So if we shift that language that, yeah, you can build a building that is an apartment or a fourplex, whatever it is. Even if it's a residential building, and maybe that's part of that, switching that language from commercial to central, you're still in that central business district, regardless if it's a residential structure. The expectation is there is a primary business. And so I do think we can shift that language, and I'll stop what I have to say there in case somebody else has something to say. But I think that's what I keep hearing over many years since I started at the city in 2017. And I think that's where we keep getting mixed up between structures and land uses, is because there has been a history of having that flexibility in this district, and that's great. It's we see some wonderful businesses come out of it, but then we hear this language of, well, you've allowed this to be a residential structure, so that's what it is, and so there needs to be a way that we're more clearly communicating that having that type of structure, while permitted, doesn't excuse the individual from having a business with that structure in mind.
Correct. Absolutely. That goes without saying, right? No, and that needs to be ironclad in this, regardless of how many bathrooms, bedrooms, or kitchens you have. You still have to have a primary business. So, yeah, that's my only point. I don't want to. I mean, there's other stuff to talk about, but yeah, I think we need to look at that, clean that up, and come back with something that makes sense. And has purpose for that piece right there. That was the only one that really stuck out on me, was the dwelling unit one. So
I think Councilmember Barber did.
Are you saying, I'm confused a little, if somebody has a fourplex, that they can't live in one of the units, is that correct? Or I'm misunderstanding that?
So if somebody has a fourplex, there needs to be a primary business within that. So that would be, you could live in one of the units, but there'd have to be a primary business purpose for
So
them.
we couldn't rent them out as rental units then, like an apartment house.
You could rent it out short term, or if it was an apartment house, you would have to get one of the long-term residential rental permits that are available within the district.
If you're only operating residential, if you're
Yes.
doing a multi-use as a mix between, which a lot of our businesses do, a mix between short-term and long-term, that's permitted. So
Yeah,
it's just saying you
now
can't
it's
just
permitted.
live in the building.
Correct. Now it's permitted if you have 50%, let's just say if it stays 50% of those units is short term, then you could live in there.
Well, right. Once this ordinance passes, I guess,
Yeah.
then it would be fully permitted. Right now, there is a loophole and a workaround, but the ordinance, if passed, will help work through that.
Okay. Anybody see any other ones that are jumping out at them for our district that we're talking about tonight? Or yeah, anything's open. If not, we can run through that exercise with Nicola on the storage facility or storage warehouse or storage mini facility to see which one makes sense there.
Okay, so let me scroll down to the storage. So, yeah, if we have the storage facility, storage mini facility, storage warehouse. So, Nicola, if you want to give us your scenario again.
Excuse me. So for example, Herring Bay Lodge has a garage behind our rental. And I have been approached by different community members asking if they could rent out the space to store items. Under the current code, I would not be allowed to. I've also been approached asking if it would be possible for multiple people to rent out a space for their kayak and have a place to store that in town. And then that would be multiple different people asking for a storage space. And under the current code, that would not be allowed. And so I was trying to figure out a way just for this specific issue, but it would be applicable for the entire district. If you had an existing building that you could utilize for more business use, and if that use was for storage, what that would look like. I don't want to see mini storage facility on Main Street, but I also have an example of a garage that would be a perfect place to rent out as a storage space that I think would be beneficial to the community.
So,
The only one right now then is storage mini facility is would be allowed as a secondary.
Correct.
All other storages are none. So then if we go back up to the maybe you can put definitions up on the screen there, Liz.
scroll.
And it's on page 38.
This is where it gets tough when you're going
Yeah.
through this, because you have to go back to the definition. That's why the definitions are so important.
Yeah, so we're looking at storage facility, a building or structure used for the renting or leasing of storage space to consumers for the purpose of storing or removing property. So that's the first definition of storage.
So if that one were allowable, that would seem, just on its face, that would seem like it would fit. Even if Acola wanted to do it it would seem reasonable that would be at least a secondary use, in my opinion. So move on to the next one.
So then we have storage and staging freight for transportation, the process of positioning product in an indoor or outdoor area after receiving or prior to shipping. So think about the yard that we lease out to the ferry for what we refer to as the caravan lot, but it's actually leased out for AMHS staging.
Right. And in this district, it's not permittable.
And then next one would be storage mini facility, a completely enclosed structure containing 3 or more areas or rooms available for lease or rent for the purpose of the general storage of household goods, vehicles, or personal property, where the lessee of the unit is provided direct access to deposit or store items, and where vehicles do not fill the majority of the allowed storage space.
So right there is where we got the crux. We storage facility and storage facility is more lax, where a storage mini facility is forcing you under the current definition for her to have to make 3 or more rooms or areas, right? Which
Yeah.
maybe she doesn't want to make that into rooms and would just like to be able to store people's kayaks and stuff in a communal type space, just like Dawn does over in her big space. There's not individual units over there. It's just one large space, because
Mhm.
that's what works in Seldovia, right?
Mayor Campbell,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I haven't had many comments, but while I appreciate Acola's example, I don't see where it falls at all in the central business district because it's fronting a different street. So it doesn't apply. I think it's not in the same district, or where does the district divide?
So she is talking about the proper, yeah, but it applies to that entire piece of property and it's on the same property.
Yeah, the one right across from my house.
I think it's on the map.
It's
Yeah,
on
it's
the,
on the map,
yeah.
and it's brown.
If I may, can I split my property?
We don't want you to have to do that.
Seems
So-
like a moment where we could have like admissible with permission from administrative staff, right? You know, I don't think that we should get in the weeds about micromanaging every square foot of people's space, so long as she has a business license and is paying her taxes, you know. She's not adding on to her structure, she's not doing anything that's egregious. I feel like it's a reasonable thing for her to have space available for her neighbors who don't have a place to store their kayaks, or her tenants who want to store their space. That's just my input, but it seems like a reasonable request for property or business owners to be able to use that space in that way. I'd be comfortable having language in there that says, you know.
Yeah, the reason, I see where you're going, Harmony. The reason it was, you guys must have talked about that. The reason it was a no is because, yeah, right now, under storage facilities, someone could come in and build a 10,000 square foot building, right, in that district. And I mean, well, theoretically, they wouldn't be allowed to because there's no size constraints on that. But again, if you had a storage facility, yeah, that was small enough and incidental, then it should be allowed as a secondary use, I would think, in the district. I don't know why if you've got a storage mini facility that's allowed as a secondary, then why wouldn't you have a storage facility as a secondary? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that mini facility was supposed to cover that, but you guys are right. It doesn't. It seems like it's more applicable to that storage facility, but I'm trying to look up.
Why
I
don't we
mean, they
just,
even have apps where you can store at my house, like an Airbnb, but you store people at people's houses. Like there's a business for it. I just don't know what you call it.
why don't you just strike this, go to storage mini facility and strike starting from containing 3 or more areas or rooms available for lease or rent, and then have it be a completely enclosed structure for lease or rent for the purpose of the general storage of household goods. And I think the reason it says completely enclosed is because you don't want some shed structure out there that's open for everybody to see everybody else's junk.
No lean-tos.
No lean-tos. So, but I mean, yeah, if that's the intent of that, then yeah, why are you making people have 3 or more rooms available? It doesn't make sense. Just leave the rest of the definition, but get rid of the containing 3 or more areas or rooms available for lease or rent. Just
So then I think then if you take that out, then it becomes a storage facility. So is there a reason that we have storage mini facility as a definition in general? Or would
It's-
it be able to fall under one of the other categories?
yeah, they're kind of the same.
That's a good point. I mean, it's language that's been in there prior. This isn't new language, so maybe it's not applicable.
Well, I think when we were discussing this in the subcommittee, there was a difference between having space available, like you're saying, for kayaks or for something in a big space like what John has versus having a big, just a whole bunch of storage units on.
So would
Main
that be a
Street.
storage warehouse, a building or structure used for the storage of commercial goods, wares, merchandise?
Yeah, that would be for commercial. So storage facility was be for storing and removing personal property. So I think the mini facility storage was mine to try to make sure that that wasn't a permitted primary use in the central business district would be to have individual mini storage units along Main Street, if I remember the conversation. And that was why we had kept those split, but it doesn't mean that.
Okay, so then I would make a recommendation of removing the secondary for storage mini facility from the commercial business district, having it not be permitted, and then allowing this storage facility to be the secondary.
That seems to make sense for our district.
So we're saying that somebody could have a storage facility as their secondary, or as their primary or secondary?
Secondary.
Or
Secondary.
secondary, yeah.
And that makes sense because you're saying it's a building or structure used for renting or leasing of storage space. So it doesn't have to be the whole building, but a space within the building, storage space to consumers for the purpose of storing. I think that fits.
Okay, so it would be to keep the storage mini facility as not permitted and put storage facility as incidental secondary within the. How does council feel on that recommendation? Any other comments on that?
I'm fine with that and then, if that's the recommendation, then let's go back and you guys noodle on it with everything else and make sure we're not, go back. Just got to kind of think. It's hard to, satisfy this and solve this in one sitting until it fully resonates in your brain. And then you think, oh, okay, well, maybe this is why or something. But on its own merit, that seems to make better sense.
So Mayor Campbell.
Yep.
On a completely different subject, I think I brought this up before, administrative permits. Now, if my memory serves me right, there's a percentage of the amount of administrative permits that can be assigned in the district, right?
For long-term residential permits, there is a cap at 10%, which would be three permits.
Okay, so where is that list housed? Is that list housed somewhere publicly? Let's say we're just talking here. Let's say I'm interested in investing commercially in the community and I want to look at the zoning and the ordinances and everything before I make my decision. I don't necessarily want to discuss it publicly. Where do I go to find out that cap is already full or not? What's the plan?
Stop in at the city office.
No, that don't work for me. There needs to be something posted electronically where somebody can find it with a listing of who's on that list. That's the way I see it.
I feel like I agree with John that should be made available in some capacity, but I don't know if I agree on, I feel like, I don't know if we want to be giving away the information on who.
Well, I think I probably agree with that, Harmony, but I just want to know, so think about this for a minute. We're all the folks that are on the staff now. Let's say 10 years from now, it's a completely different group of people. It's a completely different interpretation. I've said this before. I'd like to see that house somewhere and where we're at towards a cap. Are we at 7%? Are we at 10%? Or what? Then I know whether the purpose that I want to do is possible or not. Before I even purchase, it's called due diligence.
So would Not sure. Harmony, did you have another comment on that? Your hand is still raised.
Just want to apologize to John for jumping across there.
Oh, no, we're good.
Bad. I was not trying to. I agree with you on the larger bit of your point. Sorry for being so rude.
Did you also say that those permits have a deadline or a expiration date?
I believe they do. Heidi might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were.
Okay. Well,
Having that expiration date might be
yeah, I
beneficial.
really didn't want to throw a monkey wrench in the thing tonight, but I'd like to see it addressed.
Heidi has her hand up here if you want to
Great.
jump in.
I was just gonna say thank you, thank you, Councilmember Kennedy. I do think we need to revisit those a little bit and obviously adding more administrative permits will require us to do that. There is a way I'm sure that we could make, some of that information public, but it's also, I would like to just throw out there, I think it's uncomfortable sometimes for some people, but we really encourage individuals when they want to purchase or buy to come in and talk to the city.
I
If you
get
have
it.
any questions about anything, we want to be part of that process with you. If you're making a building or if you're planning on building something,
Maybe
we
you
want to help
do.
with that process too. But I get that that's not for everybody. I'm saying, we definitely want to encourage people who have questions or concerns to come talk to us, but that doesn't negate the fact that we could make that a little bit more transparent.
Transparency is what I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
So let me throw a monkey wrench in this then. Okay, so if I'm at the land use table and I'm just, again, going down this on its own merit, and I look at lodging long-term residential rental. And so pull that up on, pull that up on, that's number 47. It's item 47. So pull that one, not page 47, just item 47.
It's item 47.
Yeah, item 47. So right now I look at that lodging long-term residential, and I'm looking in central business. And I said, oh, I need some sort of administrative permit. And then the first thing I do is, oh, what's an administrative permit? And I go look for administrative permit. There's no definition of administrative permit.
Yeah.
Unless I missed it somewhere else, we probably need to add. Did I
Yep,
miss it?
you did. The full code's not in front of you. This is just what's being changed. Administrative permit there's a whole section on it in the code itself that's
No, but
already
there's-
there.
Okay, but there's not a definition.
Yeah, because it has a section. There's a whole, but you're right, because we're adding more to it. You're right. Let's define
should-
that better and have it actual definition.
I would just go anything in the land use table. I'm going to go look in definitions, number one, right? Because definitions drive kind of everything here. Now, I understand. I agree with you that there's probably a whole nother section under that, but we should probably have some sort of definition for an administrative permit. So now, with that being said, I look at this lodging long-term residential administrative permit. Okay, what is that all about? Let me go double check. What is lodging long-term residential rental? So go to 47 real quick.
Are you talking about the definition number?
Yeah,
47?
definition. Yep, definition. Almost there, almost. Bear with me here, bear with me. 40, nope,
There we go.
39, 41, 42, okay, 46, 47. Lodging, long-term residential renters, a unit attached to a building or a single unattached building rented as a dwelling unit for more than 30 consecutive days. So now I guess without knowing, there's another section, so you're saying that, and I can't remember all that I guess maybe it explains it under the administrative permit elsewhere. But if I just look on its face and that's what I'm about in terms of transparency. If I look at the matrix, it says administrative permit for long-term residential rental. I look at the definition, and that tells me that any unit attached to a building that's rented for more than 30 days is required to have a permit. if it's not required, and maybe it says that under the administrative permit section in the code, then we need to say something in under this definition, see more information or anything. Because the way this is right now, just on its face, is regardless if you're meeting a primary, secondary, any use, if you've got a long-term residential in this district, you got to have a permit. And I know that's not the intent.
So the intent is that if that's your primary business, that you need to have the permit.
100% agree, but it doesn't say that anywhere. This is all trying to, then that's why we're having this discussion, right? We're trying to clean up the language, make this simple. It does not say that in this section of the code. Maybe it says it, maybe it explicitly addresses that under the administrative permit. We'd have to pull that section up, and but we should have something here simply for people to go look at that and maybe see administrative permit in section blah blah blah, or something like that. Yeah, I mean, the land use table needs to stand on its own merit. And that was my issue with the dwelling units too. You can't have some sort of hodgepodge deal. All the rest of these are pretty clean, right? Because you can just simply go back to the definition and, oh yeah, well, I don't meet that. Boom. Yes or no. But there are some of these one-offs that just aren't fitting the bill. Go ahead, John.
The transparency list I was referring to could be as simple as permit issued and the dates of the permit and parcel number. You know what I mean? And and then a percentage of where we're at on the list. It could be that simple, but it needs to be available publicly.
I'm sorry. I don't know if I agree with that parcel number.
Well, I was just using that as an example. It could be any other type of identifying number would be fine with me, but I'd like to be able to look and know, are we already beyond the 10%?
Sure, having some sort of something that says that we have this many permits available for this is more than reasonable. My only thing is, and I think we should have some safeguarding language on there, right? Like only one permit per property owner, sunsets this, non-transferable, things like that. That's obvious. I'm sure that's already in the works, or already exists. But as far as disclosing which property owners currently hold those permits, I just feel like that's a sticky thing. I feel like, not to be rude, but you do have, people can be, people dicker, I don't like that neighbor. I don't like this person. I want to contest their permit. That's just a thing that people do. We've had some really litigious individuals come through this community. And I think that bogged down our government, our administration, and our community members. So I think to safeguard ourselves from that, it doesn't need to be up for public discussion. If we trust our staff, then we trust our staff. If we don't, then we shouldn't even be discussing the possibility of this permit. That's just my opinion. I do agree with you, John. There should be some transparency on what is available and what's already in use. But I think that we should safeguard individuals from discrimination, I guess, or heckling. I don't know. However you want to put that or take that. That's my thought.
So this is Randy. If you had a spreadsheet that just identified the slots that are available, so if there are 5 and just do, issued whatever date, and then just keep a running percentage and have that posted, then you don't have to disclose anybody's personal information, but you can just identify where you're at. And then I don't know if we have any remedies available if you've gotten to the cap, if there's any discussion about exceeding the cap. However, that I'm not advocating it one way or the other. I'm just saying if you have something that has a limit, how you deal with it, when it's closed, then it's just that just occurs, or if you have a way of dealing with it. But I think in terms of transparency, I think that could be solved without having to disclose any particular information.
I'm actually good with that, but Mayor Campbell's got a good point that there's more that needs to be done when it comes to the permit and the understanding of the permit.
Can't even find it. I've been looking for it since you guys have been talking. I'm searching all over the code and I don't know where it's at. Maybe
Like
I'm
I
just,
said, I think the ladies that have been involved in this certainly can come up with something here.
Yeah, and I think as we go through having more administrative permits and different ones, will flesh out that process a little bit more.
That's all I'm asking.
And we can put on the website, you know, the number of permits that we have. I think the conflict is whether or not we want to post those individual people and parcels
No,
on there or not.
I'm
And like building permits, they're available if you come in and probably want to look at them, but posting it online there's a lot of public records we have that are not posted online that are still available if you come into the office.
If you exceed,
Talked about that though. That is on Liz's checklist, is to do a updated planning website, a planning
Mhm.
page that has more of those records available. So I think we can move that up the queue, Liz, on your list, and hopefully work towards that here in the short term.
Heidi, I certainly wasn't insinuating that I don't trust the staff. That's not where I was going with this conversation.
hey, does anyone know what section of our code administrative permits is even in? It's not in Title
So-
18 that I can find.
It's under commercial business. So this is where you're
It
right.
is?
It needs to be pulled out of there and it needs to be on standalone on its own. Because right now, the only place that's in there is for those long-term residentials, but now we're applying it to more uses. So if you guys want, when we're done with this conversation, it can go multiple ways. You can have us reconfigure and bring it back for another work session for council. And then I would suggest inviting the planning commission to that meeting, or you guys can refer it back to the planning commission, knowing that we need to work on administrative permits and we need to work on, what was the other one I had written down? Dwelling units. And then have them do that legwork and then send it back to you guys. It's whatever makes the most sense, depending on how much work you think needs to be done, if it should fully be vetted by the planning commission, or if you guys want us to provide you guys with a few examples and you guys close it out.
I'm kind of fine either way. I mean, Randy, do you guys feel like tackling it, or I don't think it's that complex. I'm also fine with the administration taking a crack at it, and then we bring it back and maybe have one more quick work session, or we we should probably have one more quick work session to make sure that it's what we want before we introduce it. Otherwise, it just gets tangled up and we got to do a bunch of amendments and stuff.
So I think I followed your thought process, and I think that getting everything in a final form before it goes to the city council for decision is probably the best thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think through. The planning commission will meet, the first Wednesday of June. So we have that. I mean, we have that space. Because I'm just trying to think through between.
Meg, you're off. You're not on mute.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and agree with you, Mr. Mayor, and also with Randy. I just think that we need to have another work session. There's just so much language that needs to be readdressed or relook. We need to dive deeper into it, get it to make more sense. So per se, And I feel like that's gonna need to take more time. So a whole other work session, I feel like is necessary. That's all.
Okay,
So given that, maybe what we could do is if staff could take the first pass at it, and then we can bring it back to the planning commission to do a review. We can bundle everything that, because I think, sounds like we have agreement on mostly everything, and we have a few items that need to be worked to a conclusion. And so if we do that, bring it to the planning commission, finalize it, and then submit it to the city council. And then if you could, and then we could, I guess we would do a workshop.
The other option might be to do a joint work session on it.
Okay, we could do that. So how
well,
does,
it's gonna get tough, you guys, getting everybody together, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we're
okay,
starting to get into busy time. I would be fine with, I like Randy's idea. If staff can, yeah, I don't think there's anything that we disagree on here. I think it's just getting the language clean. If you guys feel that you have time and you can take the first crack at that, and we could get that on the planning's agenda for that meeting in June. They could do a cursory review, agree, see if there's anything that, talking amongst their group that if they have any issues with, or bless it. And then if it's all good, any minor changes, and then we go ahead and have another work session, to see what the final language is. That one would probably be relatively short because we don't have to go through the whole thing again like tonight. And then I think we're ready to introduce it.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Heidi, you good with that approach?
I'm good with that.
All right.
I'm all for that. That makes sense.
Okay. Sounds good. What did we get through it, or is there more?
That's it, unless we want to do some more exercises or anybody has comments on any of the other items on the land use table.
I think one last comment. I think it would be a good idea for everybody on council just to take, and I said this before, take a couple of examples of properties in the district that and you know what their business purpose is, and maybe they're doing multiple things, right? Run it through the table and see if it passes the sniff test. If there's an issue with it, then bring that up, right? That's what we got to do, because once, and hopefully, I was hoping there'd be more members of the public tonight, but hopefully everybody's taking a look at this and running their own scenarios through this and going, oh, okay, that makes sense, or oh, got screwed up. You know what I mean? So generally, I think overall everyone's done a great job on this. We've cleaned a lot of things up, tried to make it better. I'm glad that we had a very productive conversation tonight. Got some stuff out there that hadn't been fully fleshed out. Came up with some good workarounds, and I think we'll have a good piece of codified language when this is all said and done. Go ahead, Harmony.
Hey, I've just been sitting here trying to figure out what we've been talking about with the administrative permitting, and like John saying, if 10% is we're maxed out, how do we pursue this, whatever. And if we're having like posting dates with sunsets of 5 years or whatever, I feel like if you were to put a time limit on someone's permit and then they've come up on it and somebody else is hoping to apply for that permit, I want to be really careful about how we, because you can't just say, all right, well, you're no longer, whatever, somebody else has outbid you on this permit, however that process will work. I feel like there should be a reasonable turnaround time on someone like popping up a business, like, what does that look like? Okay, within a year or two of no longer having this permit in hand, you need to have a business in here. But I feel like it wouldn't be reasonable within the same business year of having that permit come up for rediscussion is reasonable. I'm sorry. I'm just sitting here doing exactly what you're saying. I'm just like, if I were a property owner or somebody trying to purchase and was interested in this permit, what is my process? What's the, you don't want somebody like sitting on a permit for 50 years. I don't know. And maybe that's just me. I just don't want to spend another 2 hours talking about this specific thing. So when you're looking at it, staff, something to consider.
So through the mayor, we can bring that permit back so you can see the language, and we'll have to update it anyways because we are updating what qualifies for administrative permit. But I do believe right now the way it sits is there is a waiting list, and you can go on the waiting list for an administrative. Right now it's not full, so there's room for a long-term residential rental permit. I believe there's room for two, but I'll double check on that. So if it's full, there's a waiting list, and then those ones that have the permit can renew and keep that permit as long as they're active and the individuals are on the waiting list. If the active long-term residential rental permits become inactive, the waiting list, for it goes by first, first sign up or first person on the list has that opportunity to grab that permit, and so on and so forth. So those long-term residential rental permits are not going to be taken away from somebody who's actively utilizing one and continues to renew their permit. But there's a waiting list for those who want that permit when it becomes inactive. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. I also was trying to find in my code book where those permits are, and I was like, man, I couldn't imagine being a property owner in possession of one of these permits and then being told, sorry. I don't know. You know what I mean? That just seems like another can of worms, and it's like a whole nother. I just don't like litigious issues,
How long do they have to be inactive before those permits become available to someone on the wait list?
That's not defined. I mean, that's if we have that conversation with the individual, and if they want to continue to utilize it, then there's no cost associated with that permit. They put the permit in and they have it. So, and we do need to revisit it because right now we are not, it's not a full-fledged system right now because we're not filled up. And I realize having more administrative permit types added on, we'll have to flush that whole system out. But that hasn't been, I guess, long way to say that hasn't been thoroughly defined, only that either that individual is actively using their space and they have the permit because they're actively using the space, or they're not, and then it goes to the wait list.
So I think we proved our point here that we probably do need to spend a little more time on that section. And just, yeah, work up a draft that addresses kind of all the points that were brought up. If best you can. Yeah, it has not been an issue, but guaranteed at some point it will become an issue.
Will do, Mr. Mayor.
All right, sounds good. Probably getting late here. Do we have any public online that wishes to comment on anything that we've discussed tonight?
Let me give them a moment. I'm not seeing any hands raised online, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Well, I really appreciate everyone's discussion tonight. Very productive. Yeah, and I figured it was going to take a little bit of time. Vivian, sorry, I know it's late where you're at there. Appreciate everyone's, yeah, this gets a little heated sometimes because, people's livelihoods are at stake and, a lot of things. This is a very, very important district, to our community, the way it looks, the way it acts. Everything about it, down there, because it's one of the most visible ones that people see. So, appreciate everyone's time on this. And, yeah, any final words, comments before we adjourn?
Mayor Campbell.
Yep. Hi, John.
I just want to make sure Randy and Nicole and the city staff know I appreciate the time they spent here, and it is a lot cleaner and I think we're there and we can just work on a couple things and let's move on. Find out what our next project is. But good work, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Pretty appreciate your guys' dedication to this. So, okay, if there is, Harmony, your hands up. You had final comment?
Yep, just want to echo John there. Clarky wanted to tell you guys he just caught his first fish, 21 pounds. The first king
Awesome.
of the year.
Good job, Clark.
And away, but anyways, I don't know.
That a king?
Yep, first king of the year.
Nice.
Oh,
Wow.
nice.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate everyone's attendance tonight. And with that, we will go ahead and adjourn the work session for the evening. Thank you, everyone.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night. Thank you.
Thank you.